Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome back to another Super Sunday Supplement special. We are, as you can see, a terrible trio. We have definitely got the best and the worst of the five. We've got Piotr Ruzanek, who's a legend and a superstar. We've got Adam Lawrence with the brain of Britain. You've got me, the bad mouth with the great personality, but you've got to do it a little bit like that. Mr. Ross Harper is going to be otherwise engaged for the next couple of months, potentially. But we'll try and sneak him back in every once in a while. He won't be able to keep away, I'm sure of that. We'll reel him back in with the FOMO, absolutely, Adam, yeah. And Helen should be back with us next week. So we're down to 3, but that means no less of the minds you'll be engaging with. And we will kick off, as we always do, with the highlights and or cliff notes of Adam's Sunday supplement. And if you haven't read it or you don't know where to find it, you can go on Partners in Property's public page. You can go on to Adam Lawrence's page, Sue Sims's page, Ben Nichols' page, Angie Nichols' page. You can go on to LinkedIn. It's everywhere. If you're not reading it, it's your own fault, really. And there's a back catalogue going more than a year. So if you want to get involved and you've got nothing else to read and you want to get a little bit of education and ask some serious questions about what's going on, then jump on board. Adam, take it away.
Thanks, Jay. So this week I've gone for the risk button as the image to reel everybody into reading it, and because of just what's been going on, generally speaking, in the macro environment. So I've done a bit of a highlight, and I've tried to put together a bit of a survival kit, if you like, for the risks that are going on and for people who are either looking at getting into property or already holding a number of investment properties, and anybody in between all of that, really. So first of all, a discussion of exactly where inflation is and then where the upside risks still are, because we haven't passed the peak yet. You know, we've seen a number this week. For the first time, we've seen a number that was below the consensus forecasts, which is somewhat positive. But let's see how the forecasts get on over the rest of the year, because we've got a bumpy ride with another 40% of energy price cap coming in October, which will probably be the worst possible timing for all of that, of course. So we need to understand the inflation upside risk, not really where it's at the moment, but how long we're going to deal with all of this. And then the interest rate upside risk as well, because it's all very well to have sort of woken up and smelt the coffee of the new world and we're in a rising rates environment. But let's say the markets currently say we'll be at 2.75% base rate by Q3 next year. Let's say that the markets are right. Let's say inflation's still at 7 or 8 at the time as well. Perfectly possible. Where does that leave us? It doesn't seem to leave us in an environment that will see rates going down anytime soon. And at 2.75, the economy's in significant trouble. You know, it's fragile. We'll see a very quick reversal of a lot of things that we've seen over recent years. We'll see redundancies, we'll see contraction in businesses, we'll see repossessions, we'll see insolvency and liquidation coming back in a slightly larger way. That, to me, that's not for debate. That's pretty much guaranteed, really, to be honest with you. And then I've talked about why the wage price spiral risk as well, really. So if we get into a situation where, look, inflation is 10 at the end of this year, probably above 10, what happens when the union bosses come in and stamp their feet and get the placards out and want 10 or 12 or whatever for their workers? What impact does that have? And that is a bit of a throwback to the 1970s, because that's the last time we dealt with really significant industrial action. Now, we've got a different backdrop these days, but we've also got a more fragile economy because of what's happened during the pandemic, supply chains being shortened just in time, being a much less viable manufacturing methodology than it was a few years ago. There's quite a lot to deal with on that basis. Talked a bit about private sector and public sector pay. Wages are up about 5% at the moment. That's obviously not covering the cost of living. But then also pointing out, really, I mean, we're beholden to the Russia and Ukraine situation. The most bearish stuff that I've listened to think that Ukraine, Russia is a conflict in what is a new world of potential wars. China going into Taiwan would be a big upside risk on that front in terms of what that would do. What would the sanctions look like in that situation? Russia turning off the gas to Germany. I mean, they've done that to Finland at 4 a.m. yesterday morning. It won't be a great time to be in Finland right now, that's for sure, as a bit of retaliation towards the NATO joining. I mean, obviously they've dressed it up as something else, but it's all about Finland and Sweden looking to join NATO. And there aren't really any quick fixes to all of that stuff. You know, global energy prices are where they are. They're 12 or 13 times where they were in real terms 20 years ago. So it's not a world we're used to. You know, gas has always been cheap. We've used gas fairly liberally and all sorts of stuff. Because it's been cheap, it's now super expensive. So renewables don't happen overnight, obviously. Pipelines to bring in liquefied natural gas from the Emirates or from the US or wherever won't be built overnight either, and likely won't be built by the winter. And also, we probably don't think about this, but it's not just we think about gas. We think about gas to heat our homes. Apart from anything else, the amount of gas that's used in the industrial process is pretty incredible. Then I've gone on, and I know you're going to enjoy this bit, Jay. There's effectively an arbitrage at the moment in between some fixed rates and some floating rates, which just shouldn't be there in the markets, but it is because products move slowly and it's evaporating very quickly. But you can get some 5-year fixed stuff, limited company debt still at the moment under 3%. Now that shouldn't be happening. You know, on our best products where we've been quite attractive borrowers and good at negotiation, when we're on floating, I'm talking about loans that have been originated in the past few years, we're on like 2.7, 2.8 above base. I think our best one is 2.49 above base, but still obviously a base of 1, which is going to 1.25 next month. You can pretty much bet the farm on it. That's obviously 3.49, but I can fix for 5 years at 2.98 and 2.85 and things like that. Shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it is. So if you are in a position where you can utilize that, you've absolutely got to do it, with a few caveats that are, this is not financial advice, etc., etc. And you need to read the bits. I'll leave the fine detail to the supplement or Will's audio version that we've just been recording as well, which I'm sure he'll pop up on the necessary platforms if you follow Will's My Property World podcast. But then the real point around where people can not only survive but maybe thrive from all of this, I've sort of forecasted a situation where perhaps the market will be up about 6% this year nationally. Still, that's roughly where I was at the beginning of the year, and I still think that's probably about right. Inflation will be 10. Let's say rents are up 3. Well, if you've got 100 grand in the bank and you don't do anything with it, then it's only going to be worth 90 by the end of the year. You're going to lose your 10%. Or it's only going to be able to buy 94% of the property that it could have bought before because of the 6% rise in the market, right? If you've got a portfolio and you've got that fixed rate debt and you've got some cash in the bank, which I think at the moment it's critical to have some cash in the bank. So if you haven't, you need to cash some stuff up, maybe re-gear some stuff, maybe consider selling some stuff. Yes, you've lost your 10% on the cash, but you've gained 6% on the portfolio in terms of the property value. Your fixed debt has gone down but deflated by 10% thanks to the inflation, and you've also gained 3% on your rents. So the percentage you're spending on your fixed cost debt goes down. And that's a key thing to understand at the moment, because I talked a bit about the old 1970s joke where basically it's the investment game was who could lose the least rather than who could make the most. Now, when inflation's 25, and it was 25, you know, we're talking about 10, and that's incredibly significant, but it was 25. of course, it's quite difficult to keep pace with all of that. And that 25 wasn't 1 year on its own. It was kind of 16 or 17 either side of that. So I'm not predicting we're going into a maelstrom quite like that, but we could see a pretty horrible peak. And it's kind of difficult to think about how to utilise that. But property investors are in a relatively unique position as long as they fix their debt. And I keep talking to people who've got floating debt from the old days, and I'm kind of like almost grabbing them by the collar and shaking them and saying, this is the time to fix, right? You might be on base +1, base +1.5, base +2, but what if base goes to 5? What if it goes to 6? You know, it's not out of the question at the moment, you know. It could go beyond that. And of course, that could be a horrific outcome for lots of SMEs and small investors. You imagine that on back of the Section 24 scenario where you haven't touched your portfolio. I mean, it's nuclear, you know, and a lot of the very big companies, they won't really miss a beat from all of this. All they've done, their profits will suffer, right? Their share prices will suffer. That will happen because the returns on equity will get squeezed because the debt costs more. But they haven't gone out and like massively overgeared because they could get all this cheap money. They've just taken the cheap money and said, thanks for the extra profits. And of course, that's what's bid the stock market back up over time during the 2010s. So difficult times, but the overarching point is keep calm and fix your debt at the moment. And I've done this week as kind of a bit of a two-piece because next week I want to talk a bit about the money supply in real estate and property inflation versus economic inflation versus asset inflation in general, and also a bit about the rising cost of maintenance, conversion, development, all the rest of it, which I must say, and this might be a nice segue into bringing you guys back in, I'm a bit surprised that I haven't seen more half-finished projects just yet. I've seen a few, but I was thinking I might see quite a lot of them because people didn't see the price rises coming, went into a development. There is one, and this is an interesting one. Talk about a confluence of circumstances. There's one round the corner from me, a very high-end executive homes project that looks frozen at the moment. The owners live next door. They're not people with a background in development at all. They're Russian, which I'm wondering if that's something to do with the project freeze at the moment. And nothing has happened. We're talking about 10 million quid's worth of property probably on this site sitting there that only needs windows and doors and then second fix finishing off. And that's been the case for, I want to say 6 months at the moment. So I'm sure they're not using particularly onerous bridging lending or development lending or anything like that, because I've checked out the company that owns the property and there's no charges against it. But still, that's sitting for reasons unknown to me. So there's been a couple of letters being drafted on that one, but I haven't seen as many of these as I thought I might do. I don't know if you guys have, because you're closer to more auction catalogues than I am, realistically.
Well, there were quite a few that we looked at where some people had gone back to brick. You can tell that they hadn't even they'd done nothing more than stripped everything back to brick to take a look at it. And that's a fairly easy thing to move on from, rather than someone getting 80% of the way and then having to track back, right? The other thing that we're seeing more and more is that there is a flight from people taking an asset, getting planning permission, and then not building it out. So there are more people that are thinking, right, okay, I've got this asset, I've added the value. This is the kind of thing that we would do. We're not builders, so we would always sell at that point. But there are a lot of people, when you look at the companies selling, this is X, Y, and Z Developments Limited, right? So they're not doing it just to get the planning. They're doing it because they want to build out. Maybe they're build to renters, maybe they're whatever they are. But a lot of the projects are stopping at planning has been granted, value has been added, send it on to someone else who's maybe more aspirational or wants to do something else with it or can profit more from the build out. And there's a lot more of those entering the auction market at the moment.
And are they getting the prices that you would expect them to get, or are they not selling, or how are they playing out?
Well, there were a couple that we had expected to sell. One that we was dealing with that looked quite attractive. It's a shame we don't do build outs because it was the right kind of area and right kind of project for us to have taken it on. But there were some probably slightly larger in terms of unit in development that have sold fairly well. But it's like the 2 or 3 unit conversions. Seems to be a little bit of a blockade there, a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a few, like Jay said, projects that had planning permission granted in like 2020 or stuff like that, and they're now being still offered in the auction. Some even like are being offered with expired planning, and no one like renewing it. But I mean, people still have appetite for those things. It's just probably like when whoever bought something like 2 or 3 years ago, they expected a certain amount of money to be paid towards refurbishment. Then they got quotes, and the quotes got more expensive. Maybe they waited another 3 months to get more, and they got more expensive. And then they were like, "It's no point even starting the project because we're gonna lose money. So let's just kind of sell it and lose money quickly rather than kind of lose more later on." And but those things seem to be selling. Like there's always someone who's able to take them on.
I suppose at a simple level, ultimately, if you've got a building and development company, you still have pretty much maybe the same. Maybe you've got more need for a hospital job at the moment than you've had for the last couple of years, because things have calmed down a little bit, and the prices have just forced some people to. And if you work on quite big projects, I know a guy, not that he works on huge projects, but he'll take on fairly significant refurbs as a one-man band with subbies. And he phoned me a couple of weeks ago to say someone's dropped out on me and I've got, 8 weeks to fill if you want any bits of work doing, because, he'll do anything from, say, stick a new bathroom in all the way up to 200 grand's worth of work on an HMO extension, conversion, etc., etc. So that certainly there's a bit of that going on in terms of, and of course, if you control your own work pipeline, ultimately you're more bulletproof than ever. So I suppose that's maybe one of the reasons why there'll always be some appetite for that stuff. I was just wondering if the pricing was because obviously I got offered one within the last 10 days, and after a bit of digging, because they were trying to get me to come and view it. And I said, well, look, I need to know about the pricing, because the pricing sounds light sitting in this seat right now. I'd asked the direct question probably 6 times before I got the answer. Oh, well, yeah, well, he's got a building company, so he's priced it for his building company to finish it. I said, well, that's no good to me because I don't have a building company to finish it. So now I know it's not going to stack up. Look, I'm valuing it on a residual method. I want to make a profit. I hope you're okay with that, right? This is a build that got planning in 16, started in 17. And so all the extra problems on top of what you just said, Piotr, add 5 years on to all of that as well. And what price of work's up since then? 100%? Is it, labour and materials? It's got to be something close to that at this point. Yeah. So ultimately, it's just like, well, the thing is, because we're using the residual method, you realise what that means. Works price has gone up. GDV's got up a fair bit, to be fair, as well, but not as much as that work slice is taken out of it. And you're thinking you're going to get more money than in 2017, and the reality is you're going to have to take less. So if you can't see that logic, there's no point in me coming to look at it, because I'm wasting your time and you're wasting mine. So no harm, no foul. But I've seen in the unsophisticated levels of the 100 grand houses that you guys know I like to ply my trade in, generally speaking, the market hasn't really swallowed that pill thus far, that we're now looking at stuff and thinking, well, how much does it do that? It's 30 grand, whereas it would have been 18, maybe 20, something like that pre-pandemic. But it is 30 grand. That's what they're coming in at. And the market, and yeah, the house has gone up in value as well. But maybe if it's put on 15% and it's 100 grand, it's 115 end product. And the refurb might be up 12, So you're effectively still paying the same price as you were, plus or minus a few grand for these sort of projects. But some of them are going with the underbidder by 20 and 30 grand on some of these at the moment. I'm thinking, well, I don't think we've got our figures that far wrong. I accept we don't get it right every time, but but of course, I mean, I suppose to an extent that's always been the case. But there was a lot of fuss this week over Barnard Marcus on social media and how they had so many unsold lots, which I wondered about your guys' take on that, because I looked and it looked to me like of the unsold lots, if you dug in a bit further, there'd been 30 or 40 that hadn't actually been offered on the day. And there were lots of unsolds, don't get me wrong, there were lots of unsolds, but it wasn't quite as bad as some of the posts were making out. And the auctions that we've been in this week, we bought one. We rang the bell. We bought one. That was good. We didn't manage to buy anything at auction in April, so it was nice to get one in. But it was a lot of the other stuff. We were still 20 grand off, 10 grand off the pricing, or 10% off where we needed to be on the bigger lots. I don't know if your guys' take on whether there is any pace coming out of the auction market, because obviously it's the lead indicator we've all got, isn't it?
Well, I guess from us chatting to auctioneers, like over the last couple of weeks, what's noticeable is like there's less people viewing properties, and generally like a bit less interest on the legal parks. Obviously, it's not on every lot; it's on like noticeable kind of amount of lots, but it's just noticeable that kind of there's a bit less interest in things. But there's still lots that are selling for like really good amounts of money. But they have to, like, people do realize, I think, the cost increases, the bills increased in HMOs and things like that. So there is a bit of that effect, I think, going on. But whether that's temporary or not, we never know, because sometimes those things happen for a month and then the next month it's like everything's back to normal. And you cannot say what was the exact reason why there was less interest in May. Maybe it's because half terms, maybe it's because something else. There's so many things, subtle things that can be at play, and it's difficult to put it to a macro reason.
I mean, we were bidding. Actually, we put a pre-auction offer on, and we were bidding on a property at a Clive Empson auction. This was towards the beginning of the month, and it went for about £30,000 or £40,000 above £40,000 above where we were going to be at. And we were sitting there thinking, when we look at that, we think, okay, who was the buyer? How do we work out who the buyer was and how they got to that price? I mean, for us, it was, as a trader, it would have been a slightly slower play, because there was a really small way to increase the value of the asset, but it would have required the end of January next year to have been able to action that. So for us, that's a long trade. But actually, once you release that value, it probably did stack up at that price. But that's contingent on the values in the area increasing. And it's a nice area. It's close to the station, near a school, blah, 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 blah. All the nice things you want to hear. It had a bit of PD potential knocked in there as well. But we sat back and we thought, okay, we went literally to our max and it just kept flying. We're like, okay, this is silly. We're stepping back. The conversations we're having with auctioneers around pre-auction offers and underwrite offers and things like that is that there's more conversation taking place, whereas before it would be like, no, this is going to the room, the vendor's not looking at blah blah blah. Now there's kind of like, okay, they're not biting our hands off, like it's not like, oh, thank God you called, this is the deadest of the dead, you're reviving it. It's kind of like, okay, well, they would feel comfortable with this, or maybe would you think about that? And all of a sudden there's engagement, where for the last, well, at least through the pandemic, there was very little engagement because it was really quite hot. So maybe that's a turn in it. I mean, I made some comments in one of the articles we did for Property Investor News magazine about the Allsop residential auction a couple of months ago, where it was a little bit painful for them. And I said, well, you know, it, like Piotr said, it could be like that for 1 month, and it can change the next. And the next month they had a roaring auction. It was brilliant. People paying attention to the Barnard Marcus auction, there's a lot of mistakes that you can pick up from there. First of all, there's a habit with that auctioneer to list a property, let it go unsold, approach the vendor and say, look, that's the price you wanted. The market's not there. Do you want to relist it X amount lower? And there are properties that you'll see in that catalogue repeat 2 or 3 times. So unsold lots in Barnard Marcus aren't really a massive surprise, because they will find its value and it will sell if it takes 2 times, if it takes 4 times.
They're working their funnel in a different way. They
work it in a different way. While some auctioneers will literally put the mark, it needs to be here, and if it's not, go elsewhere. And there are some auctioneers that go, actually, at this value, it's probably a 50-50, and we'll just try our luck with it, right? But you find actually you get a lot of repeat churn through Barnard Marcus, and there's nothing wrong with that. Once you're aware of it, you can go, okay, it's not the right price now, but I'm going to see it in the next auction. It may be 20 or 30 or 40 grand less, and I've got a strike price in that region.
Sure, so but you or I wouldn't want to do that as a vendor, would we really? I mean, as traders for velocity reasons, me, just because if you've shown it to the market and the market doesn't bite, I'm a big believer in one chance to make a first impression, you know? So if I'm going to sell it, I want it to be in its best light. And if it goes to auction, I know I'm taking the risk, because that indelible footprint is out there on the internet. You've seen it. If you even the shortest of time of Rick's valuers will have a quick Google of the address and think, well, why didn't it sell at 85 when you put it up? You know, you're gonna have to. It's gonna benchmark where people are at. It's gonna. So I think that might be. I mean, obviously they sell some fairly chunky stuff, so that you might say to me, look, that just doesn't apply in for a London house or a London flat. But that's very much my belief around offering stuff to auction in the first place.
There's like Barnard Marcus clients and customers. They come from like probably different places than most of the auctions, because Barnard Marcus got like a vast network of estate agents, and they've got like local auctioneers as well offering through the London room. So I guess it's like those people are approached differently, and it's basically the things that haven't sold with estate agents, they're being placed in the auction, a slightly lower price, and then to slightly lower, it's just a process that they go through, that's one of the reasons.
The sale from the auctioneer to those clients is, maybe you don't want 800, but let's put it at 800. And if we get lucky and it sells at 800, we'll see you after your 4 weeks in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
But if
we've got a running joke in the auction buyers club. When you see a property, it's said 1.3 million Barnard Marcus, we know it's probably gonna come down to about 900 in 6 months' time, slowly, and then it might sell for 950. But we see that all the time. Like, this property comes in at this price. There was one property in Gospel Oak in Hampstead here. It was like a block of 4 flats, I think, and it was offered initially at 3.6 million. It didn't sell. 3.4, it didn't sell. 3 million, it didn't sell. 2.5, didn't sell. And then finally they put it on with a guide price of 1.8 million, and it sold for 2.5. But it was literally like 5 times. And I was just asking ourselves, like, why would someone put it on 3.6? It's almost obvious.
I suppose the thing is, at the moment, it's twofold. I guess you're looking for that idiot who thinks, just because I've got it less than the asking price, you know, then I've got a bargain, because people don't necessarily realise. And then when you've got a market like we've had for the last 18 months, if you're not paying bridging interest or whatever, you haven't got investors to think about, then you think, well, you shrug your shoulders, wait another 6 weeks. The market's probably gone up another 1%, 1.5% in those 6 weeks. So while the market's right behind you, it's maybe not the worst idea in the world. But I think we would probably all argue that it's not a good understanding of the time value of money. But of course, that then depends on what you're going to redeploy. If you're redeploying it in holidays to the Caribbean, maybe you can wait. If you're redeploying it in other offers, I think like where the three of us are very, very similar in that we gain a large edge on the way into a deal. Ultimately, that's what we do. That's the cornerstone of what we do. What we then do beyond that looks different, but we'll try and add value. I'll sometimes go through the pain of the wet work and the conversions and the refurbs and all the rest of it. You guys will add the paper value, or we'll just have already seen the value in the purchase, and then I'll maybe realise some of that value further down the line, either refinancing or perhaps selling on after a few years of holding time, taking advantage of a bit of that cheap debt that's been out there that I'm waving goodbye to on a daily and weekly basis at the moment, as the rates just start to. It's a bit like being in an Iron Maiden at the moment. You're there and they're just cranking that handle, just one extra notch every time the Bank of England talk to each other. You think, here we go. Oh, there's a little bit more back pain, a little bit more neck pain. The spikes get a little bit closer to the neck.
Well, I mean, without ruining our reputation, Adam, we're looking at a deal at the moment where we may actually pick up a paintbrush. Where it's got us. Don't tell too many people, but we're considering it.
Tell me that's just to draw the floor plate out on the floor, just so someone else can buy it, Paul Ribbon style. Please, come on. Tell me that's the way.
Yeah, just like start painting names on the rooms, like convert to bedroom.
This could be 2 bedrooms.
Oh, no, it actually could be a little bit more substantial, but not massively substantial.
Do you guys look at times that, I mean, the thing is, this has been completely up the spout the last couple of years. For years before the pandemic, I would find a relative seasonality in the market, because typically, springing to mind, January and September were the 2 auctions I would see would oversell quite significantly, and we'd very rarely be able to buy anything particularly good. And there would be a bit of a post-Easter, pre-summer shove sometimes, but it's a bit harder to see that. That might have been half in my head and half in the data, And then, of course, 2020, all bets are off on seasonality. 2021, certainly the early part, all bets off, lockdowns and all that still going on. But do you guys see that seasonality, and is it something that you use? And if you do, are you seeing it as being back are we back to normal seasonality, or is it just variance and noise like you've been talking about with that Allsops auction and all the rest of it? What do you guys think about that at the moment?
Well, we used to, didn't we, Piotr? We had like seasonal kind of ebbs and flows, and there were times when we looked at the market and go, right, we're selling here. Like if we're selling on this month or this month, and if we're buying, we aim to buy here and here because it's slightly quieter. Maybe it's the summer holidays, or maybe it's Christmas and people just wind down and slow down. But in reality, since the government put the restriction on repossessions being sold in December, you're getting far less repo stock at that time of year when you could pick it up. Not at the best price, but you'd be able to pick up something that you could add some really good value to. But the fact now that every auctioneer has probably increased their number of auction dates. So, it's now larger auctions covering more of the time across the year. So where the auctioneer had 7 auctions a year, they've now got 9. And where they haven't got a catalogue event, they're running every 2 weeks a smaller auction, an online auction in the background. So there is always there's no dead time in the year for auctions now, whereas there used to be. And you could look at those dead times and think, right, who's had to kind of creep into the catalogue here, saving them wait another 10 weeks to get into the next catalogue. You see what I mean? So there's a lot of now late entries entering into catalogues where maybe they're not getting the same exposure as when the catalogue launches, or there's a lot of things coming in like that. And maybe there's maybe there's edges in the game that you can pick out there, but there's a lot less ebb and flow. I went to an in-room auction on Thursday, my first in-room auction in just over 2 years. Had the time of my life. I missed it so much. I can't believe how like sad and pathetic my life is. I had the time of my life at this. I didn't buy a single thing, but the auctioneer afterwards, because I know them well. She came up to me afterwards and she goes, "You need to come to every auction." I said, "Why?" She goes, "You stood next to like 4 of like the biggest lots where they were bidding." She goes, "You're now the mascot for the auction team." Like, and because I moved around the room because you do. I ended up standing next to the guy who, like, there was an auction lot that was like 550 to 600, sold for 950 or something like that. It was like the biggest lot in their catalogue. It was an East Midlands auction, Lovett's auction. Really good room. There was about 200 people there to start off with, and at the end there was about 50, which is, for a 22 lot catalogue, it's quality. And it was their first time back in the room. It was an absolute joy to be back in the room. So I'm going to put some effort probably next month to go to in-room London auction. We went to one last month, but we're both loath to call it an auction, and well, we'll stop there. We won't be returning. If we're looking for some light entertainment and take the mickey out of people, we might go back just for the shits and giggles, but we're unlikely to go back in a serious sense.
So, Jay, out of interest, in that East Midlands Lovett's one you were talking about, roughly what percentage sold in the room versus online and phone, would you say?
So they sold 17 out of 22 in the room. I don't know about any post-auction sales, but in the room. And I would say of the 17, 12 sold online or to proxy. But it kind of that gives a message like that the online were doing the majority of the work. There were people in the room. There were 2 lots where no one in the room was bidding. It was 2 or 3 people online, but every other lot had action in the room. So it was kind of like either the room was spurring the online bidders on, or the online bidders were being competitive to the in-roomers. But the fact that they had those both options and they had the environment open for it. And they were doing on average a lot every 4 minutes. And if you're looking at someone like the online hybrids, that could be, there's a lot every 7 to 10 minutes. So it was quicker having those people in the room, kicking the online bidders up the arse saying, bid, we've got business to do. The rest of the day.
That's a really key point, I think. And the thing is, if you run an auction house, ultimately, you want to get, what I see online is, part of the auction frenzy and part of what the houses, ultimately want to happen is they want to create that pressure cooker. They want to create that, you want to be putting people to quick decisions. If you don't, you lose some of your pace. And I'm sure you probably suffer on pricing a little bit as well. And of course, there's always the chance of, if you've got 2 people bidding online, that one of them loses their internet connection or something like that as well. So there's a lot of, it's really interesting because a lot of auction houses could do with listening to that, I think, because they can still see what they can gain from in the room. And your point around velocity of lot, apart from creating that scarcity and pressure that the auction house likes to create because it does better things for their vendors. Also, if you've got a 250 lot catalogue, it means you're not going to need to do some of these marathon 13.5-hour sessions, and it brings that back into play. You haven't got to burn yourself out trying to offer the whole catalogue. You can get through it a lot more quickly and get the job done. And ultimately, hammers down per hour or whatever is an important metric, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, momentum is key. Like when I worked for an auction company, the catalogue was built around what lots are where and how you're going to create momentum to get to like the next one that they think is really interesting. The market will decide which ones are really interesting, but it's kind of like they would position what they felt were juicier lots every 5 to 7 lots. There would be another one that would like kind of throw a bit of momentum in and make people, when this was in the room, make people in the room think, right, okay, there's more activity, there's bidding. The whole idea of in the room is it's making people feel comfortable to bid. And the
And also,
hardest thing to do for an auctioneer is to like, it's always hard for someone in the room to start the bidding off. Like, because no one wants to be that guy that jumps off the cliff first, right? No one wants to be the first person when someone said, jump out the airplane, I'm going to put this thing on your back. Don't worry, you're the first person to ever try it. It's going to come out. You're going to live. Everything's going to be fine. The first person who did that had balls of steel, ovaries of steel, whatever they were. It doesn't matter. You had to have been nuts. But that's what it's like, putting your hand up at being the first time bidder, which is
easier to be a lemming. Easier to be a lemming than a leader. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why some auctioneers, or all auctioneers, will utilize the "I'm allowed to kick the bidding off. I'm allowed to make you feel comfortable enough to start bidding following my lead." and yeah, that's how it works. But going to that auction, I don't think it's a one-off for them. They're a good operator. The girls that love it. I'm probably going to go to their next auction as well, just because it's a good relationship to foster going there and supporting them. The conversations I had with some of the buyers in the room was really very good. Talking to the two guys that had that bidding war on what used to be a cinema complex, I think. So it was a multi-commercial 2-story with 4 flats. But it was like the potential to do further PD and conversions and planning. Like whoever was into that would make an absolute dime out of it. But yeah, it's the kind of thing I want to be getting back into, going back into more in-room auctions. So I'll do Barnard Marcus next month. I'll pick one of the 2 days. You know, the amount of business that can be done in an auction room that is missing. I mean, I don't think you need the room anymore. I'll say it. You probably, as an auctioneer, you don't need the cost. You don't need the aggravation. You don't need all the blah, 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 all the stuff coming off the bottom line. But I remember distinctly the amount of people who were thinking about selling a property at auction that would turn up to an auction to see how it worked and then would approach a member of staff. Oh, this looks really good. Can I sell my property? 4 or 5 times an auction. So if you take the cost of an auction and those 4 or 5 additional lots where those vendors are going to be probably multiple times sellers, it's worthwhile. Even if you take a smaller room, and the girls that love it, they took a smaller room, but it worked because it was sardine cans.
Rather pack a smaller room than have a big empty one. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But because in everyone's mind, it was like, okay, maybe a 50 or 100 people will turn up. You know, fingers crossed. But 200 plus. I mean, I was there from lot 2. I was a little bit late, but really, that's where the action really kicks off, from like after the notices, after the introductions, all that kind of stuff. And it was like 200 people packed into the bidding room, an extra 25 or 30 in the little antechamber where they've got a bar, they've got Together Money were there, they've got a couple of other people sitting around. And it was a really good environment. I'm kind of left there thinking, right, who else is going back in the room? Because you're missing out. And the upsell to a vendor is, look at the people that are coming into this room that are bidding up the people that are online, or the online people bidding up the people in the room. All of a sudden, better prices are being achieved, better results are being achieved.
I suppose as well.
The results, but I think they probably sold 1 or 2 more post auction, because there were some that were like close enough.
The level of interest, and also ultimately, it might be something that persuades you to put a lot with them rather than one of their competitors. So it's difficult. And you think about, we had a great talk at Pitt Manchester on Friday from George Samoyla, who's sourced 250 properties for his clients in the last 3 years. So he's no slouch on that front, right? And he was still talking about how much offline marketing he still does, and ultimately you can see the parallel between the offline and the online auction, and the offline direct to vendor leads and the online Googles and Facebooks and all the rest of it. A lot of that depends on what people are used to, what age they are, etc., etc., etc. So I think there probably is still quite a clear place for it based on what you've just said. But I think, like anything, you can talk. If you don't carry Rightmove as an estate agent, you can talk as to why you don't carry Rightmove. If you do, you can talk down the competition. That's part of the game, right? It's objection handling and that sort of stuff. But I think that's a pretty compelling reason for a lot of them to be going back to doing at least similar to what they were doing. And also, I think it probably says a bit about where we started this discussion around where's the market at in auction at the moment. There were 200 interested enough to turn up in person, even though they could have bid online. That suggests to me the 22 lots, that suggests to me the market's still pretty hot, right? 8 per lot or whatever, plus the whole of the internet is pretty juicy.
Especially that like Lovitz auction, it's at night, right? It's like 7 p.m., 6 p.m.
Yeah, 6:30.
6:30. It's a more of a social event.
It was very social because like when you saw people leaving, literally their antechamber, there's a bar there. So people were coming out, and I was talking to a couple of people that won some stuff. There's terrible signal in the hotel, so I wasn't distracted flicking through Facebook or like on some of the lots. People had to kind of interact, and I think it was very smart.
It's a bit of a casino environment. You cut off from your
no
phone.
Natural light,
there's no natural light. There's bar.
No clocks on the walls,
and you can win something.
I love it.
Nice.
I was watching the Big Short again the other day, just because like we mentioned it on the 2 or 3 of the lives, and I was like, I haven't seen it for like I can't remember how long. So I obviously it's still brilliant, but I was watching it. It was like, oh, and here's Margot Robbie in a bath to tell you what this actually means. And I kind of thought there's got to be like a Sunday supplement where Adam takes this really complex subject and just puts Margot Robbie in the bath as the picture to attract. It's just got to happen. I don't know if I'm filtering that into your mind. It's just got to happen.
That's sorted my JPEG out for next week, Jay. Thank you very much.
Welcome. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. And then they had like Anthony Bourdain discussing another one. Oh, when chefs are buying in this. Like it was just the cinematography and the way it was done, because it could have been a very dry thing that could have paced people out. People that could have gone, I'm just not into this, I'm not getting it, because there's a lot of work to be done for the payoff at the end, right? People had to really go, I really don't like this character, but I want to see what comes out here. But the payoff was massive, right? That end was absolutely brilliant. But I think the way they interspersed it with all of these different kind of informationals or pace changes was actually really very good. Kind of had me reassessing the whole film again, which was great. But just before we go, I know we're running close to time, and I want to touch on a couple of points of your supplement. First I wanted to talk about windfall tax, because if there's a windfall before October, there could be another change in what 2023 looks like, right? Especially for energy companies. And secondary to that is, when you said, you've got the war, the Russian-Ukraine, you then have potentially China kicking off with one of their neighbors. What do we feel is going to happen with the EEC? Because there's a lot of fractures there already, and there's there were some conversations post 2016 Brexit where Andalusia was thinking, right, well, I don't want to be part of Spain anymore. And then York was like, I don't want to be part of Britain anymore. And then you had like the Greeks and then the Italians, and everything kind of got silenced and quashed and settled, and because they were dealing with bigger fish. And then you have the kind of, France had managed to, keep their political party in. But if that was to change, they're not really pro-Europe. So there seems like there's a couple of elections within Europe that could really change the tide as to what the EEC looks like in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Well, this could take a while, Jay. That's quite a box to open, but it's worth. I think you bang on with, for example, the fragility of the EU, and I think fundamentally, and this is not an ideological point. I'm not particularly pro or anti-EU. I didn't like. I thought leaving the economic union was economically suicidal. I thought leaving the political union was probably the right thing to do for the UK. So I was very sort of torn on that front. I came down on the Remain side because I didn't like the flavour of the politicians that were promoting the Leave side quite so aggressively. When I'm agreeing with Rees-Mogg and Farage, I always give myself a little slap in the face and have a look in the mirror and check what I think. But there are some fundamental principles of economic unions, or unions like the USA, that the EU doesn't tick any of those boxes. A common language, particularly true freedom of movement of labour. They say it, but it isn't really there. Transportation, apart from anything else, being a potential issue. And the single currency, it's not, given the might of the economic nations in the EU, it's never really the euro been treated with the respect it might deserve, as probably the only realistic alternative to the dollar as the global reserve currency. And it's never got anywhere near that sort of status. So those, to me, are long-term strategic problems with the EU. It's one of the reasons why I don't own any property inside the EU, outside of the UK, and have never really wanted to. Much happier to rent and see what happens. That might change in the future, but I'm talking from an investment perspective. I don't see the investment case at all. One time in the future, I might pay the ferryman if I move to Portugal or whatever, but that's a different conversation. And fragility is really the capital, and has been the capital of the EU ever since it started. Certainly ever since the single currency came together. I can't remember a time without Maastricht and the ERM in 1992. So we can go back and look at signposts that were significant signs of fragility, and the overall unerring commitment of specifically the Germans to the project has been the key to keep people in. There have been rather large incentives for people to join, countries to join, in terms of or certainly perceived incentives, maybe I should say. Whereas, of course, what it's enabled for Germany is it's enabled them to get away with effectively setting the central bank rate for a lot of their neighbours and using the same currency and smoothing out all of those risks for their giant manufacturing beasts, apart from anything else. Yeah. Now, that's not been seen as a particularly bad thing for the rest of the EU, although you could say, well, look at Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain of the sort of 2010s and all the problems that there were, particularly in Greece. If you were Greek and you went through any of that, you'd know, Varoufakis at his very, very best, trying to fight the might of the EU bankers is quite an incredible story. If you've never look, it needs a Margot Robbie in the bath video explaining it, of course, but rather than man with grey beard explaining it. But it was a fascinating story. So there's a tinderbox there, and what did you take away from the French election? Le Pen was a lot closer than she was before. Now there isn't there's a 3-term limit, isn't there, in France? So he can go again, and it might be even closer again. But you feel there's an element of the kicking the can down the road scenario. And of course, the skillful politician inside an EU country will always be able to blame the EU for stuff, won't they? And what sort of, nationalism as a whole, as a trend, if you like, again, you could go back a whole number of years. But if you said, if you did a school project on nationalism in Europe or wrote a dissertation on it, you might start the clock around Yugoslavia in 1992, and then you'd go through, Bosnia, you go through all the things the fractures that have happened. You talk about the Skexit referendum of 2014, and as and when there is another one of those referenda, we're going to see a closer outcome than last time, aren't we? Yeah. It might not be that they go, but it might be 49-51, 48-52 rather than 45-55. So nationalism is a trend, and it's a trend that isn't yet seeking to reverse, which is not ideal if you're trying to run a union. Now, bear in mind, Texas wants to be independent sometimes. So, it's not like the US and other famous conglomerations don't have their issues. They definitely do. But yeah, it only takes one or two bad actors. I mean, Orban's been in power in Hungary for some time now, hasn't he? Really a decent length of time. And then you've got people like Erdogan in Turkey who of course, we're told are not realistic joiners of the EU at any point in the near future. Don't know how much the Russia situation impacts any of that. But I think to try and characterize the whole geopolitical thing, which is basically a thankless task in a couple of sentences, I would say the reason why people are using phrases like World War III, they don't mean generally Putin's going to hit the nuclear button. They don't mean vast conflict throughout Europe or Europe and the Middle East and Asia or throughout the world, right? They mean the battleground is different. The battleground is economic. Arguably, it has been since Germany's efforts in the early parts of the 20th century. As far as Europe's been concerned, largely speaking, it's been economic battleground, right? Yeah. And you've ultimately got the big players. You've got the US, you've got the EU, you've got China. That's what you've got going on. And you don't want that balance of power. Where does Russia fit into that jigsaw? Well, resources. They fit into it with resources in a big way. And that's where we've really let ourselves down as a country with our energy strategy for the last 15, 25. I'm not picking on any particular political parties. You know, everyone's screwed it up, really, to be honest, ever since the 1970s, and allowing, you know, nuclear to be misrepresented, really, as the answer to people's problems and questions that it could have been. And obviously, nuclear's moved on, and it's got other things it can do, such as thorium reactors and things these days, smaller reactors. It doesn't just have to be Hinkley Point C and a 20-year project. You know, it can be faster than that. But what it can't be is sortable out while Russia provides, you know, 18% of the world's gas. And I mean, that's a figure that really, you know, really beggars belief. And fragility is the number one thing. And I think we've said before, foreign policy is a dark and horrible place that you'd be thankful if you're nowhere near, and be thankful that someone else is near that on your behalf, because it's the most forget private equity, it's the most sharp elbowed of all games in the world. And happily 99.9% of us don't know what goes on, generally speaking, in those hallowed halls and diplomatic embassies and all the rest of it. So yeah, definitely fragility. I wouldn't want to be I'm bearish on the euro in the long term anyway, really bearish. I've been for years and years and years. And so I think hedging around exposure depends where you want to live, but also depends what might happen if the EU did come, you know, at some point in the next 20 years, will another country leave the European Union? That's one way of framing the question you've just asked. If I was pricing that up as a bookmaker, I would say yes, 1-4, no, 3-1. You know, that's probably about the right price. It's heavy odds on. 20 years is a long time. Who will it be? Obviously, it matters significantly who it is. And there are, like you referred to Andalusia, Catalonia, etc. There are other reasons why there might be people leaving, because they might be searing apart within member states. Not picking on Spain, but there's obviously other possibilities as well. So the one thing that goes against that argument is the political capital garnered by Russia invading the Ukraine, and the importance of being in the big club. NATO will no doubt have some time to prove its worth or not, as this carries on, because I'm leaning more and more towards this is going to take years to unwind situation, even if it looks like occupation of Donbass rather than, you know, war in the whole of Ukraine. It still looks fairly glum, and it still looks pretty good at the moment for a Sweden and a Finland. But what are they doing? They're trying to join NATO. If NATO has got the teeth, do they need to be in the EU? You know, the US ultimately call the shots in NATO, don't they? Or are the big dog anyway, and people are going to have to knuckle under. So what do the US think about the EU? They're pretty, well, obviously it depends who's in charge, but none of them are, you know, they care about Ireland. And that seems to be about it sometimes, to be honest. So, yeah, jury's out, but I wouldn't, the future of the EU to me is a difficult path to keep navigating and something that could change. And one other event could fracture it the other way, rather than a Russia bringing it closer together. You know, the vaccine rollout was poorly managed, and that could have caused more problems than it did. Got sorted in the end, but that extra layer of bureaucracy really showed how poor it can be in situations like that. So it's the 2020s. Something crazy is going to happen within the next 2 years, isn't it? So when it does, we'll have to deal with it.
It has that certain je ne sais quoi in the end, doesn't it? I don't quite know what, but it's there's something there with it. But all right, let's talk about the potential for windfall tax next session, because I think it has the potential to change some of the level of inflation, certainly, and it could keep us in a positive GDP to avoid a technical recession, which I think, even if it would be a technical recession, would be quite impactful, because the way those things are positioned in the media and played out in, you know, PM's question time are actually more detrimental than the fact that it's just technical. So let's leave everybody before we give them.
Let's come back to this next week,
and we'll talk next week. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks everyone for comments, and we'll respond to those later. And we'll be back next week.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.